Here we go. Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm excited that I get to speak with you and see the ocean behind you. I think that's what I'm looking at in Jamaica.
Yay!
Ooh, I can
Ocean.
travel vicariously through you. Cool. So, what do you want to talk about, GuruNischan?
Yeah, good question. I thought that maybe we would just start having some conversation around conversations.
Yeah.
Where do we start?
What are you said you were writing. Do you want to talk about what you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on my book. One of the things I've realized is that the revelations and the breaking wide open of what's happened in the Kundalini yoga community and 3HO and Dharma, the culture I grew up in, these stories that are coming out now in the public domain are unconscious memories that my body has been holding for decades. And I didn't know what it was. And so when I started doing a lot of personal work over the last number of years, I started kind of excavating and uncovering just a tremendous amount of darkness that I had no idea, really even what to do with. And so I knew a book was coming from it because it's been such deep, dark, heavy, traumatic healing level reclamation. But it's only been in the last number of months that I actually really could context it like, oh, that's what that material or debris was living inside of me. So, I'm writing my book, and it's about my personal journey. But one of the things, basically, my personal journey around healing sexual trauma and reclaiming my own sexual sovereignty and my own sex pleasure and my own feeling body for myself, taking my agency back. And that experience for myself has been one that went in a direction that I didn't know where it was going to go. And so the coming out of it has felt very freeing in my body. And it was only when we were on the listening tours and the stories of my brothers and sisters that I was raised with that went to school in India, and hearing about the women, reading of course the report, but even just hearing the long-term stories that have existed, what I realized was that, wow, we have a systemic culture of silence, and shame was one of the main tools used to silence us. And this is a collective thing. And so the last 8 years for me was a personal journey I thought I was on, that I was healing my own karma and, whatever trauma I was holding. I mean, I didn't really even have any idea what it was. I just noticed it there, and I wanted to feel myself, and I couldn't. And I was like, what the hell? So I kept digging until I could feel my own pulse. So seeing this level of abuse has really cracked me wide open. And it's just made me realize that the predators that were living in my body were literal memories of abuse that happened to other people in my community around me. And just like when we play mantras in the environment and we're absorbing a consciousness, this abusive consciousness was also permeating our environment. And I absorbed that like a sponge. And I know now that what I excavated out of my body were actual real life stories of people that have been financially abused, sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually abused in my own community. And yeah, that's what my book's about.
That sounds like a lot to work with. So it sounds like you have enough to write quite a bit.
Well, the thing is that for me, it was all just about wanting to feel good. Like, how come I can't notice, when I started practicing Kundalini yoga, I didn't do it because I wanted to be a teacher. In fact, I had lots of reasons why I didn't want to be a teacher. And I ran from being a teacher. And unconsciously, I didn't realize it, but I was playing out a really deep pattern that comes from our community, which is where there were business people and kind of the elite hierarchy of our community. And then there were kind of yoga teachers and kind of the peasants or the, you know, the servants that built the companies and in different lower capacities. And unconsciously as a child, I absorbed, wow, I don't want to be a yoga teacher because I can't make any money doing that. And if I do want to make any money, I need to learn business because the business people made money. And again, I didn't have those thoughts when I went into business for myself, but I realized now I was unconsciously playing out stories that had, you know, had been implanted in me and without awareness, so to speak.
Yeah. You know, what's so interesting for me as you're talking about this and I'm thinking about is that when we watch a documentary about a cult or we, you know, listen to somebody's story about their abuse or trauma or whatever, we're coming at it from the perspective like where they've already realized that that's what they've experienced. You know, like we're watching the documentary, obviously the person who's recording it is realizing that this was an abusive environment. But when you're growing up in it, I mean, there's like, that's normal. You know, that whatever you're brought up in is normal.
It's not only normal, but our nervous system actually gets regulated to that early childhood abuse. And so that's what I'm realizing has been so traumatic in my own body. Like, yes, I've done a lot of work since 2012. Really what happened was in 2012, a business that I had built for about a decade came crashing down. And I immediately recognized a pattern. And I felt it like a soul, what I call a soul pattern. And it was this weird familiarity, like, this is familiar. You know, I was ostracized, I was being kicked out of my own business, and I was, you know, people that I thought that I was really were loyal, and my family were now turned against me and wouldn't talk to me. There was just all these things. And, you know, instead of taking those things, it's like, oh my God, all this is happening to me. You know, I was overly in my positive mind because that's been my default mechanism of handling long-term systemic trauma. I didn't realize it was my positivity that was saving my day, right? Among lots of other new techniques that I learned for survival, right? But when I woke up to that, I was like, wow, this is familiar and I'm repeating something here. And instead of, you know, moving on to build another business, I realized, wow, I'm being asked to go inward and figure out what this is really about. And I had gotten a vision of what I was supposed to do next, but it was very clear, you know, in the vision, like, you're nowhere near the person you have to become to deliver that or bring that to the world. And the work you need to do is internally. And so I knew I had a lot to grieve. I had built this business for a decade. So I had grief. My self-esteem was tied up in that business. My sense of identity when it came to being a successful woman, leader, entrepreneur was all tied up in that business. You know, and because of my yogic background, I knew that wasn't my real identity, but I couldn't shake the familiarity of it. I was like, gosh, there's just something interesting here. And it did remind me of growing up where, you know, I wasn't not privy to the fact that there were cultish behaviors in our community. My mom left very early and she was ostracized, and because she chose a different sort of sexual orientation, she's bisexual, and, you know, she was ostracized for that and made out to be the crazy bitch because she felt her feelings and had anger about, you know, no, you can't send my children to India, stuff like this. And she spoke up. She had a voice. She had a sense of agency because she left in 1979. But that's confusing as a child growing up in the Dharma, you know, because here is your whole stable way of life, and then here's this. And so you learn to play the act of loving both. And by 15, there was enough hypocrisy happening around me, you know, people sleeping around, affairs happening, you know, there was the kind of elite energy, all that was there. There was kind of, you know, bad business practices, like these things kind of were whispered through the community. You know, it wasn't a secret. If I'm 15 and knowing these things, you know, they exist. And I kind of assumed that people knew things. And I just decided kind of like, I'm going to move on. I'm going to kind of shed the dogma, the religious side of the way I was raised, and kind of more keep the health conscious aspects and the meditation and the yoga. That always kind of more resonated. And so, you know, that was my approach to life. It wasn't up until 2012 where that business, really between 2008 and 12, when my business started having crazy things. I got into Kundalini yoga as a way to reconnect back to my center. And I find this to be the most interesting aspect to what I see happening in the world, in terms of like, we tend to want to grab onto the teachings to say, oh, but there was this moment in my life where it changed everything. I was so depressed, or I was so lost. And that was that moment. For me, that was about 2008. I decided to take teacher training with Kaur, because she was the closest embodiment to my father, who was coming to me in my meditations in the midst of this chaotic moment in my business that was falling apart. And, you know, the thought that I go back to my origin source, right, to get on track. Now, that didn't seem too far out, because I thought that this was an amazing science and technology that helps you become more aware in the dark, right? Like, so that made sense. But when I started going through it, you know, there was things I noticed, and things I noticed in me, and things I didn't want to do, and wondering, wow, why are they promoting, you know, covering your head, or reading Japji, or seek scripture, or I just didn't understand what felt like to be like a marketing funnel into Sikhism. I knew that growing up, but why is that being taught in yoga teacher training? I thought to myself. But you know, I hadn't been in the scene for decades. No, I mean, yeah. I just had no idea how teacher training evolved over the years, because I wasn't involved. I had no interest in being involved. You know, I think a lot of us growing up, you know, a lot of the kids that came back from school in India, you know, by the time, you know, we come of age, we start looking at the world and asking better questions, and we kind of drift off. But we love our family. We love our community. We're trying to find the silver lining in obvious things that weren't good. And nobody talked about the not good things. It just kind of like was kind of pushed into the humor category, but you know, it kind of was there. So again, I was quite surprised when I kind of learned about the teacher training stuff. But then Christian's like, teach. And I'm like, I have zero interest in teaching. Like, you know, and I had to start examining. I was wearing black coming to student, you know, teacher training. And she was like, what are you, a ninja? You know, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm developing my inner ninja, you know? So, you know, because she would challenge me, but because of the depth of our relationship, this is where I was able to grow with that. You know, again, it wasn't until my business came fully crashing down that I started teaching Kundalini yoga, mainly as a way to feel like I had a sense of purpose, and a way to kind of manage my own emotional stability and feel like I'm showing up in the world. Because I was really in a grieving stage, you know, of my own business, of my old business. And I was hyper aware that my next business, I didn't want my next business to be a yoga brand. Mm-hmm. I knew it had something to do with taking my growing up years in spirituality and consciousness and like merging it with my business years in marketing and sales. But the becoming of what that looked like and felt like, I didn't want it to be a yoga brand. And so, you know, as I started teaching Kundalini yoga, I did it with inquiry. I did it with curiosity. And I realized, wow, this is so natural for me. And that's what happened. And I started kind of looking at the things I didn't like, and I didn't do those things. I couldn't teach from the podium and not talk about Yogi Bhajan and infidelity, or my father in infidelity, or the rampant, you know, I would say regularly, don't think that this lifestyle is a pure lifestyle where everything is the petaled path, because you're mistaken. And then that's a piece in you that you have to begin to cultivate, to say, why are you seeking something externally, right? So I would teach this way, and I would start picking apart the teachings of my own self. And of course I didn't like the everything, you know, Yogi Bhajan on the pedestal stuff, but I never, ever, ever comprehended, you know, in my life, I had reconciled infidelity, corruption, hypocrisy. I mean, every religion around the world has these things, you know, lifestyles, community, this is what happens. And I love my community more. And so then not. And I really wanted to reconcile the teachings inside of me, mm-hmm. in a way that said, wow, I can fully show up and teach this and not feel like I'm doing a double standard in myself, because that was one of the biggest things showing up for why I didn't want to teach, which was, I don't want to have a public and private life. I don't want to project one part and then realize this whole other inner world is happening, because that was very real in my childhood growing up experience. So I resisted teaching for that reason, and I worked very hard at constant transparency in these areas I was struggling with, like wearing white or whatever it was, right? And the things I didn't want to do. If I didn't feel like I wanted to wear a turban, I didn't wear a turban. Because, you know, you can practice really great science and techniques without wearing a turban of another cult, right? So I knew these things in my own self, but I didn't feel strong enough to tell other people not to follow Kundalini yoga as they learn it. I just am trying to plant in them, ask better questions when you're in these environments, because you can get swept up very easily. And I would say stuff like this when I taught at the European Yoga Festival. These are things I would talk about. And my body of work when I started teaching Kundalini yoga was about the lower chakras. It was about feeling the dark energies, the places we've been violated and manipulated and hurt and don't feel safe, and like really dealing with that area. And I know now is because unconsciously I was trying to actually work on that in myself. Like I realized at one point I couldn't feel my own emotions. I knew I had anger, but I couldn't feel the anger. And I started inquiring myself, or, you know, becoming, you know, inquiry about it in myself. And the message I got was, you have to stop practicing Kundalini yoga. And I'm like, and I didn't get it in relation to like, in order to feel yourself. It was more like, you're over cultivated in this practice. Your will is overdeveloped. You can't feel your own belly because it's too strong. So I noticed it in small little chunks, like, what's going on in my body? How come I can't feel this? What's, you know? And yes, Kundalini yoga would make me feel good, but it wouldn't necessarily help me access more of myself.
So what to you,
and so I noticed that.
What's the difference between like how you would feel an emotion now and how you used to? I'm a very feeling person, so it's very difficult for me to comprehend. Like when you say I couldn't feel my anger, what is that? What does that feel
So
like?
anger, it feels like really tight muscles, really contracted digestive tract. It feels like fire moving through my body, heat in my body, but having no emotional association with anything. So my body could have a physiological response to something, and I couldn't associate it to any emotional anything. And again, I didn't link this to Kundalini yoga yet. I just realized, wow, I need to do something else that helps me feel. And so I realized it needed to be something more fluid, not so rigid and tight and precise. So I started getting the feeling like, wow, I like this practice because it's precise and it's helping me work with my nervous system and working my spine and all these things. But I don't like that I can't feel some pulse in me of what's really going on. So, you know, this is 2015-ish. I start doing some work in New York called the School of Womanly Arts. And this is more like feminine, fluid, owning your pelvic, you know, owning your, you know, your pussy and feeling the pulse of your own desire. And desire became the language of this work. Like, what is your, you know, becoming a researcher of desire and my own pleasure. And as I did that, because I had done so much teaching on the chakra system, I knew that my desire lived in my sex organs, but so did shame. So as I started going for my desire, all I found was shame, and then more shame, and then more shame. And I started, from that work of the womanly arts, I started practicing a practice called Orgasmic Meditation, which also deals a lot with it deals with the clitoris. It's not like a tantric practice where you're exchanging energy, but it's a set container meditation practice that's using the body part of the feminine as a way to plug in and essentially rewire the brain and the body, the limbic brain, which is where we store our emotional stuff, right? And our unprocessed. So it floods the limbic brain and brings it in the frontal lobe. Started practicing this, and not nearly as much as I wanted, because in Chicago we didn't have people there. So I started, just training my own people to practice. And while I was practicing this practice, again, it's a non-sexual practice using a sexual container. And that's a really important distinction, because what I discovered, because it was a non-sexual practice, it was it was affecting my nervous system in a very similar way to the way Kundalini Yoga did, except it was passive receiving for me. It was about just noticing sensation, not doing anything. So that was one practice that really helped. Another one was transformational breathing. Again, not doing anything, laying on my back. There's lots of names for that, but it's like holotropic breathing, all sorts of different breath practices.
I do that. You know, Dedham Freed, who's now Diane, she leads people.
Yeah, she started. Yeah. Yes. So she started doing that training when I was in Phoenix. And so we had talked about that. That also got me into like heavy awareness. Whoa, there's all this energy stuck in my belly and I couldn't feel. And literally all the practitioners were like, I'm not getting into my heart. It's all staying down in the lower belly. And it was all just like, there was so much bubbling up for me, but I didn't have any memory of abuse that happened to me. It was just kind of collective energy that I thought I was moving. Like, this is my soul healing in whatever way. And now I know that I've really been suffering from PTSD most of my life. And that as a culture of our body of culture within our community, we got taught to deny our emotional body, number one. So everyone around us, every adult, nobody's feeling their emotional body our whole life. And this is the clincher. And what I was talking about a while ago was,
it's not even a body. It's not even one of the 10 bodies. I mean, as you're saying that.
The emotional, exactly, right? It's out of the 10 bodies. It's not even one. Exactly. And that was also troubling. I was like, my mom made me aware of how disconnected the emotions were from our community from a long time. But I didn't know how disconnected I was from my emotional body. I knew on some level, but I didn't understand the level of training we had for that. I felt like that if something made me angry, I would feel my anger. Like, I truly believed that about myself. I believed that if there was something to be angry about, I would have been feeling it. What I now know to be true is that we were trained out of feeling, and our nervous system was so regulated to not feeling that and again, I can't speak for all the kids, but I learned this in my own system. And what I'm noticing, even in the conversations itself, is we're trained not to feel ourselves. But then number two is to talk about it, like to share out loud was not okay. We were taught to deny our reality. So things that were happening in plain sight, nobody talked about it.
Right.
So what that does is it registers in the nervous system as, I have to deny what I'm feeling in order to survive.
Yeah.
And we got so perfected at it. I literally thought that was a state of my own enlightenment.
I think that is a very common perception within the community, that when we talk about the second generation and the way that they are, it's funny because Huddy Munder, my ex-husband, he always saw them and he was like, oh my gosh, they're so evolved. They're the saints walking on earth. And I'm looking at them from my perspective going like, they look really numb. They look like zombies. It was confusing. It was confusing to me because, well, for a lot of reasons, but it's interesting that you say that.
And I think that, and that is why I think one of the most important things that we're dealing with in the world today is people want to move on, take Yogi Bhajan out of the teachings and carry on as if the teachings are only full of light and profound healing. And, absolutely not. There are within that body of work, there are predator practices that were used as a way to stupefy and brainwash 50 years worth of people, and have generations and generations of children born into this.
Are you talking
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm curious. When you say that, are you talking about more the humanology practices, or do you think like certain kriyas and meditations were actually designed for that purpose?
I don't think, I don't know anything. I know that we have to be willing to look at the very teachings that were being practiced to keep people from not noticing what was happening around them for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
So, when it comes down to breaking the teachings down, I don't think he invented any of this stuff. I think it all comes from, it's slices of truth that come from real sources of truth, and that what makes a really excellent high demand group leader or cult leader is someone that is charismatic, that can take real truths, fragments of truths, and splice it together into a new sense of identity. And by doing that, we grow up with a sense of pride. We grow up with a sense of spiritual superiority that and a part of the high demand group 101 checklist is have a mission that is going to change humanity. And as a child of this Dharma, I've absolutely held that as an unconscious soul obligation, that I am here to change humanity. And while that's beautiful, that is a lot to hold. And it ties right back into PTSD and why our community is rampant with depression and anxiety and emotional connectivity disorders and all sorts of things that I didn't even know how to name in myself until I witnessed brothers and sisters tell their stories of saying, I have a hard time with this, or I have a hard time with this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, me too. Oh my gosh, me too. Oh my gosh, me too. And then suddenly I'm realizing, wow, this is systemic. This isn't just my personal story or their personal story.
I had a question about that, but no, about the mission. No, it was a comment. I actually ended up taking like a little seminar with Matthew Remski, who was kind of active in the Premka group, and his body of work is all about cults and high demand groups. And one of the things that he said in the seminar that I'd never considered is that, yes, you have a mission, but when you look at the actual work of the group, it looks very different from the mission. So for example, he's saying like the people are taught we're saving the world, but on a daily basis, you're making food and massaging Yogi Bhajan's feet, which is not saving the world. So I thought that was really interesting. It's like we have this very big, we have this very big mission statement, but when you look at the actual work, it is very different, or what people are actually involved in. So a lot of things I've never considered. But
yeah, I mean, I found the readings on high demand groups extremely helpful in seeing myself more clearly. It reminded me of a book I read back in like 2016 called It Could Never Happen to Me. And it's a book for children of alcoholics or codependent parents.
Okay.
And, I highly recommend everyone to read it. Like, it was so eye-opening at that time to be like, whoa, I do that. And realizing, wow, this isn't just me. This is a result of growing up around, abused or addicted parents, right? Yeah. And so again, I was kind of thinking I'm reclaiming my personal experience in life. I would have never put it to the fact that, wow, my culture is a systemic cult. I really did try to hold it as much in the highest light because I loved the technology. And in fact, this is so funny to me, and you'll appreciate this because, you know, I was teaching in Phoenix. One of the things I used to love about promoting Kundalini yoga is that it was prescriptive. You didn't have to think, right? You just got to, like, if you need this, do this. If you need this. And now I realize, wow, that's a part of the predatory nature of what makes that practice disconnect us from ourselves, not actually connect us to ourselves. Is within it, there's so much very subtle teacher-student, predatory, not trust your own body, because even all, you know, the women, the sex teachings, these things never made sense. They're not housed in real physiological, biological principles.
Right.
And, you know, I'm a child not having sex yet, and I knew that. I'm like, something's wrong, right? But again, who are you to be like, yeah, that whole, that, you know, so you just do the best you can to reconcile it within and carry on. And this is why my story is a sex reclamation story, because I learned, wow, I'm not a slut. We got slut shamed for being in female bodies, not for wearing sexy clothes. Yeah, we were told if we wore sexy clothes that we'd become a whore. You know, we were told all sorts of things. And then meanwhile, that's, I think, what makes this abuse that much worse. And that's what makes the silent culture happening right now that much worse. Is like, I literally watched The Deniers. I read the whole first part of the AOB. And it was literally like, it literally felt like the feeling of that narrative was living in my body and my psyche most my life. And then suddenly I read it and I'm like, I recognize that. That used to be in me. I used to carry that much shame in me, thinking that, oh, he could read auras, all these, you know, that story, that perpetuated story was and is the normal. And so that's why this process of speaking out, it's revolutionary for our community. Never in 50 years have we spoken any of our personal pain, much less collective pain, to anybody.
Wow.
You know, and then on top of that, we know in trauma that when you speak to it, it can actually bring up more memories and trauma. When you hear somebody else's story, it can bring up more memories and trauma. So if we collectively don't know how to feel what's going on, and then this stuff comes up, guess what we don't want to do? Talk about it.
Yeah.
So it's a perpetuated cycle of silence creation, where we actually become responsible for holding the silence, because if I speak out, I don't want to hurt my friend, my neighbor, my sister, parents. All of, you know, it's very convoluted and very complex, and I believe very intentional. What we're seeing with the India kids and all that, this stuff didn't come out of nowhere. The attachment theory stuff didn't come out of nowhere. These things were intentionally used, and the teachings have this predatory stuff in it.
Yeah.
So unless we dismantle the work to say, okay, what's actually housed in physiological, historical, external truths, and what was coagulated together to create a body of work where he could then run our parents and have generations of people that he could basically groom and sexually abuse.
Yeah. The prescriptive thing is super interesting, because that was also appealing for me when I first got into Kundalini yoga. I had been doing, you know, like vinyasa and stuff like that. And it always seemed, it was a little bit more like how I am, like more flowy and flexible and whatever. And Kundalini yoga was, I think I must have like wanted some sort of structure and somebody to tell me what to do. Like I didn't have that.
That's right.
So, but what I find, like the flip side of it is that you have this predatory relationship between the teacher and student, but there's also this shame that comes in, because if you have one of these ailments and you're not doing your sadhana, or you're not doing it enough or at the right time or whatever, or with the right intention, whatever you're using to blame the person for their ailment, you're saying, you know, well, here you have this tool at your fingertips that you're just not utilizing it.
Well, it could be that I just didn't do my sadhana. Well, it could be I need X, and it just keeps being another could be, you know, this or that. that in and of itself, like you're saying, it's a thread that's so interwoven in the culture and in the I say in the teaching culture, because what's happening in our community is one, hey,
visitor, keep going.
you know, within our community, there's lots of complex issues. I think one of my bigger concerns is, you know, to move on and just teach Kundalini yoga as if, you know, I've seen the marketing strategy basically of now, you know, Kundalini yoga to help you with your trauma, you know, Kundalini yoga to include people of color, you know, it's like, oh, suddenly you just jump on the bandwagon of these things. And that's frustrating because there are real abuse stories of our children that were raised like me. I wasn't sexually abused in our community from Yogi Bhajan. I wasn't sent to India and abused in these capacities. When I talk about holding abuse, it's not mine personally. And I think that's what I want to stress mostly, is that as a collective, things happened around us and obviously to us for so many. But I believe that so many have no idea the things that took place because we don't know how to talk about it. We're so trained to hold it together, to keep up, to be strong. And it's not, even if we want to feel ourselves, it's a tough one. And, you know, that's a really hard place to be.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. I have a puppet friend who's joined me.
Yes.
The feeling, it's interesting that your path to ask better questions, as you said, originated from this not feeling or recognizing that, you know, that you weren't trained or taught to feel your feelings. For me, it was similar too. I grew up, but like the opposite, basically the other extreme. Like I grew up in a very volatile environment, lots of emotions and words and slamming doors and, you know, things. And I mean, it wasn't a dangerous scenario, but it was high emotions running. And I felt like the Kundalini yoga allowed me to, you know, get a little bit calmer, less reactive, you know. But I was noticing after I had kids, especially my second one, I think, it was like, I don't have a tool. Like I felt like it was a contradiction for me because I felt like I had all the tools. I felt like, you know, you're taught, this is it. This is all you'll ever need. Right. And yet I was like, I can't deal with my own emotions. Like what's going on? Like there's this missing piece here that has to do with emotions. So I actually started teaching workshops on emotions, and I started to like look for quotes that Yogi Bhajan had, you know, things that he had said about emotions, and incorporated some stuff that I was hearing from Abraham. But yeah, that's definitely a missing piece, but I feel like it's a missing piece for most humans too, in their unique way.
No doubt. I mean, that's what I think is so interesting about all of the abuse that's showing up in our community, is it's no different than the church, it's the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts of America. It's no different than, you know, any age, you know, of what's happened historically before. It's happening in the world. And, you know, cults are political systems, cults are companies. You know, my business was a cult. You know, no wonder it was so familiar. I didn't name it that, but it was one, and it was very evident of one. So, you know, these issues, these things exist everywhere. I think the danger that is faced within spiritual predation is that there's a psycho-somatic impact that when your spiritual and psychological faculties are used in very manipulative ways to enhance a body of work that's promoting itself as pure, you know, because you then are seeing yourself in contradiction regularly. I feel this way about myself. I can't tell anybody about it. I'm supposed to be very bright. And so, you know, what do? We create unconscious trauma response patterns to show up the way we were supposed to show up. So, you know, if you're in an environment where emotions are everywhere, then you might become a placater, right? You start placating to the environment to make sure that maybe really wild emotions set you off. So you want to make sure to keep everything settled. We create trauma response patterns based on our earliest childhood environment. This goes for every human being with a nervous system. So, you know, this is the number one thing. I'm so grateful for the way I was raised, because I grew up with a consciousness and an awareness that I have a nervous system and a glandular system. And most people in the world don't learn that. And I think that is by far one of the most profound things to me, because it's helped me in my own trauma healing process. And I believe every single one of us has to take that level of responsibility to realize our nervous system and our trauma response, our response to interpersonal explosions, are going to be based on our earliest environment that we got regulated to, right? And so we learn to deny our emotional body, so we don't know how to even deal with that. And it's so interesting, because I can't say I was like, oh yeah, I wouldn't have called myself emotionally repressed. Like I said, it's more refined than that.
Yeah.
It's so default that we, you know, that what you're talking about, that numbing, it literally is a state of PTSD numbing, that we thought we were in compassionate heart consciousness. At least I did, until I was like, oh, actually I have PTSD. I didn't know.
What is that awakening like?
Well, I mean, for mostly I'd come through so much of it, you know. Mostly I was already stabilized by the time, you know, this past June and July, when the stories were really coming forth, or May, I had eyes to see this stuff now. I had cleared so much shame out of my body. I had reclaimed a sense of my own sexuality as mine, instead of housed up in the abusive nature of where it had come from. You know, I had a sense of my own body as belonging to me, so I could feel what was going on. So then I read a letter or heard one of their testimony, and I'm bawling, and then I'd feel the anger, and I learned tools to process and deal with rage, move my body, tone, you know, create sounding. And this is why I know the teachings have truth in them, because the nervous system, the soul nerve, the vagus nerve, these are all things that each and every one of us can learn to connect with, relate to, and learn about. We can learn our unconscious physiological trauma responses. Every one of us, no matter our childhood upbringing, no matter what we've been through, no matter if it happened to somebody around us versus to us, we all hold both personal and collective trauma. And it shows up differently in different people. You know, people can have psychological issues and it can show up as physical ailments. You know, we can have physical abuse and it can show up as psychological abuse, you know, the mind-body connection. We know this. So I think that's valuable, but to just say like, let's take these teachings, I think that the teachings themselves were used as abuse to so many. And I know that there's a bandwagon of yoga students that just want to be like, yeah, but it changed my life and I'm going to keep that. And bless your heart, do whatever you want. But I guess the thing I would put out to you is be willing to have a conversation. I think anybody teaching Kundalini yoga should be willing to have a healthy, honest, and grounded conversation about predatory behavior.
Yeah.
And if that can't be had, you'll feel it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can tell if a teacher will not talk about predatory behavior. So I think we need to equip people to ask better questions. We need to equip each other to say, I have a nervous system. My trauma lives in my nervous system and in my vagus nerve. I can learn how to connect with it. And doing breath practices and doing postures and doing certain things, these are a part of it. Sound, as you know, right? Sound helps. We have to learn the ways to unwind our own trauma so we can each begin to feel what we were taught not to feel. because that's the place where we get to go in and heal.
Yeah. The question of whether or not to take Yogi Bhajan out of the teachings, I know is going, I don't know if it's still going on, but it must still be. But it was such an interesting question to me, because I felt like I always wanted 3HO to be more transparent, Kara. I wanted them to, because I'd heard rumors of certain things, I guess, you know, it's like coming back to me. And I was like, why don't they just talk about it? Why don't they just say, like, yes, Yogi Bhajan has been accused of this, but, you know, we still feel that, you know, whatever their stance is. And it doesn't have to be like a company policy. It could just be like an individual thing, you're willing to have a conversation, like you're saying. But I was feeling like the teacher training, what a great opportunity to actually teach people about cults, about, you know, spiritual manipulation, about, you know, like what a great opportunity. Yeah, abuse. What a wonderful forum that could be had here. Like, if you take him out, that's like keeping him. That's like what they used to do is they kept him, they took out his past. And now it's like, we're going to take out his past and we're going to take out him and we're going to keep this, you know, at some point, it's like, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I find it to be quite a shame. Oh, you're frozen.
Oh, am I here? Am I back?
I agree. You know, I find it to be quite a shame. You're back.
That was delayed.
Can you see me?
Yeah,
now I can see you. Yeah, I find that to be, you know, quite a shame. You know, I know that it's a money-making machine and people just want to carry on and keep, you know, focused on that. And I find that to be a real disappointment. I would rather see healthy conversations being had, right? And there are really good teachers that are choosing to have, you know, better approaches, I think, within their own approach. But as a collective body, like KRI, I'm seeing it as just kind of a long-term pattern of the whitewashing, of kind of brushing it over, like you're saying, just remove them from this and let's carry on and let's ride the bandwagon of Black Lives Matter and make sure to add some more people of color into our images. And, you know, there was even a recent, you know, after the AOB report is delivered, you know, we find out that they end up doing paying a PR company to flood the internet with thousands of positive articles about Kundalini Yoga so that they can stay ahead of the stats of searches. So they literally had a PowerPoint where they're listing the you know, Yoga Mag, like what magazines have published negative articles and then what lawsuits are kind of brewing. And then they pay a PR firm to flood the internet with like 3 times, like 8,000 articles or something about Kundalini Yoga. So if you search trauma or Black Lives Matter or any of these kind of like high trending items, guess what's going to come up to the surface? Kundalini Yoga. And, you know, that kind of stuff makes me so angry. After all this, and we still haven't heard anything about anything for support of the victims. They haven't paid for our counseling. Yeah, they offered up their employee benefit for counseling. We're not your employees. We're your freaking children of the Dharma, you know? It just, anyway, so it's like, I feel like on one end, there are really good, caring, good people in some of these positions, which has been the case for decades. And yet there's also a machine at work. And that machine isn't going anywhere. And that's really disheartening. We hope that there would be more transparency. And I want more of that. I want better conversations, you know. But even my conversations with Krishnakar and her letter to the public, very disappointing. It was very representative to me of the silent culture of adults. You can't even say Yogi Bhajan was a predator. You can't say I believe the survivors. You can say it in nice, subtle, interesting use of words, but come on, stand up. Say I stand for anyone who's been abused of sexual trauma within our community by Yogi Bhajan. Like, the silencing, I think, is so detrimental to our psyche, and we don't understand just how much it's tied into why we can't feel ourselves beyond what we were taught to feel. You know, like we go right for compassion, we go right for forgiveness, we go right for resolution, we go right for wanting to figure out how to move forward, when really we're in a stage that says, God, we haven't heard anybody for a long, long time. How about we listen? How about we keep encouraging people to come forth? And it's because there's obvious denial still in place. And that's not a safe, conducive environment for any one of us that have grown up with this Dharma to speak our truth.
Yeah.
It's
The
much less been sexually abused by Yogi Bhajan directly and stand up and speak your truth. Like we're not a safe community to do that. And we can't promote ourselves as the yoga of awareness and the compassionate, transitioning to the Aquarian age. If we can't hold people who've been abused from our own community, we can't even acknowledge that publicly as a collective Dharma. We can't hold our own, there's something seriously wrong. And if yoga students aren't reading these reports and ask, it's because they want to just ride their great catalyst moment of where this technology helped them so much. And while I appreciate that, your nervous system holds memory, and I guarantee you that's a trauma response in and of itself.
Whew. Well, yeah. You brought up the European Yoga Festival. What I find interesting about that community as opposed to the American community is that there's a lot less of the lifestyle taken on in the United States. Maybe because we're a younger culture, the Europeans I think they feel like they have a sense of belonging in their culture already. Maybe they don't search for that in like spiritual communities as much, although there are those who do. But I wonder about that, because they don't seem as interested also in his life. I was teaching a class for an online community in Russia after all this was happening. I was like, I really don't want to teach yoga. I'll chant with you, but I was telling him, I was like, I'm having mixed feelings about this. I ended up just saying, I can't do this anymore. Having mixed feelings about this. It was like, well, this was all coming up at the beginning. Because of, the information that's been coming out about Yogi Bhajan. He's like, oh, nobody here really, we all trained under somebody in Europe, and we don't even really talk about Yogi Bhajan. There's a very different relationship, I feel like, there.
Yeah, I mean, I bring up, how do we practice a body of work from somebody who's a known sadist predator, without examining how did 5 generations not notice what was in plain sight? And what if the answer to that exists within the body of work called Kundalini Yoga, as taught by Yogi Bhajan? And I think it only,
the answer
when
to
I was
how
at the
did we
European
not notice? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, how did we not notice? Yeah, that meaning that, what if the practice is actually disconnecting, not connecting us to our actual center? And it's giving us an illusionary experience of being really connected, but it's actually disconnecting us from our emotional body. It's disconnecting us from our grounding cord. It's disconnecting us from our own sense of knowing and our own sense of self. And it's easy to ride. It's doing a lot, though, because it's elevating our energy. It's elevating our spirit. And so if we live in a state of constant elevation, we're not fully embodied into our body. And so, to answer, going back, I think that historically the Europeans of all the different countries took on the practice in their own. They definitely weren't more like creating the Yogi Bhajan demagogue nearly as much, but it still existed. Plenty of predatory behavior has happened throughout all of the ashrams in Europe. The teachers now, all through Satnam Rasayan, as well as teachers while I was over in the yoga festival, were already demonstrating all sorts of predatory behavior. And these things are silenced in Europe as equally as they're silenced in America. So while I want to buy that excuse from the European community, I appreciate that you didn't follow Yogi Bhajan the way that Americans did. it's infused into the consciousness of the teachings themselves to create a power dynamic that allows the elevated teacher and the lowly student energy dynamic that actually is so interwoven, because there's nothing that helps us get back to our emotional body or our sex energy and grounding it down in our body, not up and out of our body. This is common Kundalini yoga stuff. There's still the marketing funnel in Europe that goes, you know, from Kundalini yoga into Sikh Dharma. There's still the public shaming if you're dressed provocatively at the yoga festival. These things are infused, and if we're not willing to see that, then I don't think we're actually looking at ourselves or our own historical trauma patterns of our own family, not of community. I think that that's a symptom of denying internal historical trauma, and we project it into a new practice. We can take this, oh, this community is different, oh, this practice is different, oh, this has done this for me. And I do believe that the practice can help. I feel like each one of us has to determine what works for us and what no longer works for us, but we have to be willing to examine ourselves with better questions and a new lens around the nature of and the sadistic nature of predatory abuse, and how shame and silence has been used to keep those teachings perpetuating going forward without anybody bringing it up. And in the name of purity, like these things, it's in plain sight, and we don't want to see it. And that's, I think, representative of the world and America presidency and all that stuff. It's like we see things in plain sight that has been living in America for the last 400 or 500 years. It's not new, and you can pretend it doesn't affect you, but it does.
All right, I have to go because my tiny one is demanding a little attention. Thank you so much for doing this and for taking some time out of your Jamaican it's not sunset yet, but looks really beautiful.
Yes.
Is it?
Oh, it is sunset. Look.
Is it? Oh wow, nice. What time is it there?
It's Chicago time, so 5:30.
Oh, okay. So yes, it's later than here. Cool. Yeah. Again, thank you so much. If people want to keep in touch with you, how should they do that?
Well, I have an online brand at GuruNischan.com, so you can opt in. And I actually, I teach. I've distilled a lot of the science I feel like I got from the way that I was raised, and and I teach what I know to be true. I teach about the nervous system. I teach breath science, and I teach people how to really connect within themselves to feel what's happening. What is your unique trauma response based on your unique conditioning framework? And how do you begin to commit your life to unwinding that? And hopefully in the most pleasurable way possible. That's what I've discovered, is this stuff is hard work. So you might as well have a lot more joy and a lot more pleasure while discovering some real atrocities that are living inside of us that we can't even notice exist because it's too hard. The nervous system's too sophisticated. If the world's too hard of a place, it's going to shut it down, right? So I find that to be brilliant, because out of preservation, we can support ourselves. And so, yeah, if you want more information on really how to really learn this kind of stuff, GuruNischan on all the IG platforms or whatever, and GuruNischan.com.
Cool. All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Yay. Bye.
Bye.